Thanks again, Patrick, for hopping on to an episode of Untapped Stories, man. We're chatting a bit before the show, and for people who don't know, you've been one of our best NPC coaches for a long time now. I think at least 2 years on Athletes Untapped. So excited to get your feedback and dive into your knowledge of NPC training. But I think for this show in particular, and really for all guests, I love starting all the way back for the guests' early days of sports. So maybe for the audience, mostly parents and athletes, if you can kick it off and just let them know what were sports like for you growing up. I know you were a big time rower as you got into like the college and beyond years. So how did all those early experiences shape who you became as a person and ultimately a coach now?
Well, thanks for the question. I mean, for me, I'm the oldest of five kids, and my first sport was soccer. My dad was my coach, which was really awesome. But I wasn't really confident as an athlete. It's just the normal stages of development and trying to get more confident in the position. When I got to high school, as a freshman, I didn't make the soccer team, so I wasn't really sure what sport I was going to do, and I decided to sign up for track, and I became a miler, and I also ran cross country. Again, as an athlete, I wasn't really sure, kind of like what my strengths were. It was always about trying to go faster and follow the workouts, but even back then, I had some pretty interesting coaches. Some of my coaches, not my dad, but my high school coaches. I had one coach who was like very mean and very direct, and then I had another coach who was a little bit softer, and he tried to encourage us. However, so I ran track for 4 years, and then I went to college thinking I was going to run track and cross country as well. Well, that was a bad experience. That's because I didn't get recruited. And also when I tried to walk onto the team, my very first experience with my collegiate coach at the time was, he said, we're all set. And I was like, wow. So I was very lost at that point because I was so used to being an athlete and having that structure.
Yeah.
Found rowing, and I found rowing simply because someone told me that we ran in practice. So I joined the team late, so I didn't even get to race. I was just doing the winter workouts, which were on the rowing machine. And we did some weight training workouts, and I was like, this is not that fun. So we had our winter break, and then when I came back winter break, I wasn't going to go to practice, and then all of a sudden I get a call from the coach on the campus phone saying, where are you? We need you. And I was like, all right. So I came down. They found out that the only reason they needed me was because they just 8 people in a boat.
Yeah.
And they only had 7. So
it's your lucky day.
It wasn't until my first race where I got hooked. And I got hooked because the race we rode was up on the Charles River in Boston.
Oh, wow.
Against Boston College. We opened up a 1-length boat lead on them. And we were like so excited because all that time we'd been practicing and we hadn't raced against another boat. And then, of course, because we were winning, we all decided to start looking out of the boat. And in the course of us looking out of the boat, the other boat caught up to us and beat us by a bow ball.
Oh, wow.
And when I got off the water, I was ecstatic. And the reason I was ecstatic was just because I said to myself, I've never won or lost anything so close. And I knew that all I had to do is work that much harder. So my teammates were upset, but I wasn't upset. And that began my rowing journey. Continued to be successful in college. And then after college, I was pretty fast on the rowing machine, and I was encouraged to try it out for the national team. And that was my journey basically after college, trying to make the national team. Did not make the national team. Did do the Olympic trials in 2000 and 2008 and fell short. By that time I was married. And my wife was very supportive of my rowing career. And then I became a coach, and what I loved about coaching rowing was I wanted to give my athletes a better experience than what I had.
Yep.
At that time when I was working, I was also I was working in network security, which is not exciting to me at all. But one of the things I had to do for professional development was take a management course, and the management course was called Process Communication. That was a personality-based course where you had all the employees take personality tests, and then you had to figure out what they were and then try to become a better manager. I said, that's a really great tool. It would be great to use in coaching. However, when you talk about personality, it kind of crosses that line of maybe you can't do that with high school kids.
Yeah.
So I was looking for a similar tool that would allow me to work with high school kids on personal training level and mental sports level. And I found I found DISC actually through a rower. His name is Bo Hansen. He's based in Australia. and he used the disc profile as a way to actually help him become a better rower. He's a multi-time world medalist and Olympic
Oh,
medalist.
wow.
So when he trained me on the profile, it was really great because we already had a common ground in rowing. But he also said one of the reasons that it worked well for him is it allowed him to enjoy the sport more, because especially when you're trying to compete at a high level, sometimes it becomes work and it's not very fun anymore.
Yep.
So now I use disc. I use disc as a tool to help my clients both on the mental performance side and if I'm training them physically, because there is a connection between it's one thing for me to have a client come in and work out with weights, but if I'm not be able to connect to them
Yep.
and the type of athlete they are, then there might be miscommunication or the athlete won't perform as well.
Makes
So
sense.
that's kind of my long arc to where I am at now. And I do that. That's what I do here with Athletes Untapped now, is I offer my services with the disc profile.
That's awesome. I mean, and it makes sense too, because you saw the kind of the light bulb go off when you had that training, but you can't do that same exact rollout for kids or high school kids, whatever it is. So
No, you
you have
can't.
to have some other way to engage with them. But I think one note I really like to have for parents and athletes there, the best coaches always have your mindset where it's generally they had a solid experience, played for a long time, whether no matter what sport it was, but they want to have young kids have a better experience than them. Those always lead to the best coaches because they
Absolutely.
understand the connection matters more than anything. Any coach can, look up the best drills on YouTube and kind of roll them out. But if you can't connect to the kid, it's hard to break through and actually make real progress. So I love that's what you start with, and then from there it just kind of snowballs.
I agree, and I think that, just to your point, I think it's really important as us as coaches is we have to remember, like, what is the goal in working with an athlete? The goal is to help them be better at the sport that they are choosing to do. It's not about us, it's about them.
Yep.
So if we can't, and even if we have all this knowledge, if we're not able to share the knowledge the right way or frame it the right way, the athlete, there's a disconnect.
100%.
So I do actually work with coaches as well. And one of the things I find with coaches is like, well, this is the way I was coached. And it's like, yes, that's the way you were coached and it worked for you, but it might not necessarily work for your athlete.
Yeah.
So I have to also speak to athletes and coaches and parents about, hey, your son or daughter may not, like, they may be motivated in a different way. And so that's what the disc profile helps them do, is it actually helps them figure out A, what their strengths are, but B, what type of athlete they are and what motivates them, what type of environment are they most successful in. And as you had mentioned, you coached basketball. It's like, well, if you have a team culture that is a certain way, you may have an athlete that comes into the team and they have a lot of potential, but they're not succeeding in the culture you've created. So you have to figure out how to put the pieces together so A, the athlete doesn't quit,
Yep.
or B, it destroys the culture you've built.
I was curious too, because I know rowing's your background, but say if you take sports out of it, just when you're looking at kids nowadays, elementary school, middle school, high school, whatever it is, what's maybe the number one thing that parents and athletes come to you for? Because and before you answer it, I feel like there's a lot of, whether it's good or bad, whatever it is, there's a lot of stigmas around mental performance coaching nowadays, whether people think it's like more psychology or more that kids have to go only when something is wrong. I've seen in my own life and, with coaches that I've talked to, that's not the case. It can for sure just be a plus. It doesn't have to come from a negative. But what's a big reason why parents and athletes would want to work with you? Say if they're having a daughter or son who is good at sports, is having an okay time, but like what's the real advantage of using an NPC?
I think mostly, and my wife is actually in education, so I'm going to give a shout out to her. And what she has found, what she does is she works with teachers and how, if they have a child in the class who may not be doing well academically or maybe behavior wise, it's sometimes it's the teaching style, right? So what I try to help parents and athletes do is get them to understand how they absorb the information they're given, and then connect that to why they love the sport. And it's really an eye-opener for the parents as well, because I always make a joke. I said, if you have a parent that doesn't know anything about the sport, they're kind of easy to work with because they're going to defer to me about their own son or daughter. If I have a parent who played sports, sometimes that's where a lot of that conflict comes. And so sometimes even when the athlete is having trouble in the sport, it has nothing to do with the team or the coach. It sometimes has to do with the parents. So what the profile allows the parents to do is, I always lead with the positives. Once they take the profile that I provide to them, it lists it helps the athlete, figure out what makes them a great athlete, both on the behavioral side and motivation style, what environment works for them. And what's really neat is then once the parent kind of sees that, they say, oh, wow, I kind of knew this about you, but I needed to see it.
Yeah.
And then it allows me to bridge the gap between the parent and the athlete in terms of how the parent can be supportive. Because I have a lot of high school students, like you said, who are like, I don't want my mom at my games because she stresses me out. Well, then I say what we do is we come up with once we know how that athlete learns, we help the parents establish the roles that, because all we want to do as parents is love our kids and support them. But sometimes because of our experience, as like you said, you played basketball, right? So if your children decide to play basketball, you're like, oh, I know so much about basketball. Can't wait to teach them. And then they're like, I don't want you at my games because you stress me out. That would be devastating to you. So, and I won't go too much into it, but I had this is prior to coming to Athletes Untapped. One of my best stories was actually with a basketball athlete he played for a team, and his father was the assistant coach. And his father had played for the team when he was in high school.
Okay.
So, and they bumped heads. And what I was able to help the father and the son figure out was that his dad was a different type of player than he was. So once we were able to figure out what type of player the son was, we were able to establish, they would both come to an agreement on how he was going to play. And I'll use the example. So his dad wanted him his dad was a dominant player and would play wherever the coach wanted him to rebound, wanted him to steal, wanted him to defend, and he would just do whatever the coach said. His son, his motivations were more based on data, and the data was he was pretty much good at everything. But it's not possible to go into a game if you're a point guard, for example, and play and rebound if your goal is to distribute the ball.
Yep.
So his father would get upset if his son did not get enough rebounds or enough points or enough steals. And so his son got very stressed out. And so I said to him, I said, well, listen, like, it's not possible for your son to get 20 steals, 20 points. And it was literally a simple conversation. I said, I need you two to come up with an agreement about what's good, what's acceptable. And so I said, to some, like, how many steals do you think it's realistically for you to get a game? He's like, 3. And I said to the dad, I said, how does that work for you? I said, great. I said, so if he gets 5 steals, then he's done better.
Yeah.
Right. And now what if he gets 1 steal, but he gets 20 points? Well, that would be good, the father said. I said, yeah, but that's not the conversation you're having. You're finishing after the game's over. You're like, why didn't you score more points? Why didn't you steal more? Why didn't you defend? Because he was focused on not the data, but he was focused on he wanted his son to get every single category in the highest amount.
Yeah.
And his son was like, that doesn't make sense to me. So that's what I can do with athletes based on their profile.
Interesting. I didn't realize. I mean, again, I haven't gone through this. My kids are really young. I guess it makes sense though. The parents could be a big friction point in those conversations. I thought it might be more about the team, the coaches, but I mean,
it is. It is.
I'm sure it's
most
all
of the
those
time
things.
it is. Yeah.
But
most
yeah,
of the
parents
time it
have
is
a big role to play.
Yeah.
Maybe from a mental block standpoint too. I'm curious because I had the conversation, not to tangent, but the short of it is the other day I was just talking to my dad. And I never knew this, but my dad was telling me that when he was young. I guess he didn't know the term back then, but he had a mental block when he was playing baseball. Really good player when he was young, got up until he was about 12, and 12 is when you're supposed to be good because you're the oldest, but he just could not get the bat off his shoulders, like was almost scared to swing. He said the ball was coming in way too fast, and for a 12-year-old kid, his dad, my grandpa, was a welder, didn't really know anything about like sports or mental training, so he would just get mad at my dad for not swinging the bat, and it was kind of a whole back and forth. And my dad was great, kind of let me kind of do my own thing, but when it comes to blocks like that, I didn't really know how to answer it because I wanted to ask an NPC coach. So how would that work with a kid who's 12 or maybe high school, whatever, when they have a mental block like that? How do you break it down, help them understand what's happening, and then work through, I'm assuming, a lack of confidence, anxiety, fear of failure? Like, how do you get to the root of the problem in those 3 core situations and help the athlete move forward?
It's a good question. So again, I'll go back to the profile the DISC profile that I have them take. So DISC is a profile that was established by Carl Younger, I believe it was, and it was a behavior-based profile used for normal people because most of the profiles that people use are they're based in psychology, but he wanted to have a profile that could be used kind of for regular behaviors, and it's applicable across everything, not just sports. Bo Hansen, who is the rowing coach, or the company that helped me get certified in this, he using it specifically for sports, so it can be tailored for that. So to answer your question, I have the athlete take the profile first because it's really important to establish a baseline. I'm a personal trainer, so when I meet a client and they say they want to get stronger, I put them through what's called a movement screen to make sure there's no risk of injury. If their movement patterns are not great,
Yep.
I'm not going to make them do heavy squats if they have a knee-ish problem.
Makes sense.
We want to build that. So the same is with on in terms of behaviors. A, what motivates you? B, what type of environment do you learn best in? How do you approach tasks? Because again, there's a difference between the athlete who, will, if you say, hey, I want to see who runs the fastest, and they just take off. And then I'm like, yes, but I want to see how fast you go in that direction. So they've already gone that way and they didn't wait for the instructions. So there are some athletes who hesitate, but sometimes that hesitation is a strength. So going back to the mental block conversation, once we figure out what type of athlete they are, then we have the conversations about that specific incident. So in that incident where your dad couldn't get the bat off his shoulders, there's a couple of things going on there. One is, like, did he see early success and now there was pressure to succeed? Is he not executing because there's certain things that he's not really sure about? So when you see an athlete like that hesitate, you have to kind of get them to understand why. Are they being rushed? Are they overthinking things? And sometimes it's even before they even walk up to the plate. When I first was introduced to disc, I actually was working for a physical therapist who worked with golfers, and he offered it as part of his services for the high school athletes. And these were high school athletes that were having trouble with their game. So he would have them take the profile, and then he would have conversations with them while he was like working on their muscles and everything, stretching them and like that, and asking them, like, what do you think about when you walk up to the tee? And sometimes based on the profile, we would figure out that sometimes those mistakes were happening on the way walking up. They were simple. And what I loved about that was that again, like if an athlete says to me, I have a tight muscle, I say, okay, foam roll it, stretch it. And then they're like, oh, I feel better. And it's like instant, right?
Yeah.
I said to myself, that should be the same with behaviors, because it's very easy for us to unravel in sport. You're sitting on the game's on the line, you're on the free throw line, and you need to hit 3 free throws to win. And of course, what ends up happening, someone misses, and then people are like, oh, they choked. And I actually, in my opinion, I don't think choking is actually a bad thing. I always tell my athletes, choking means you're that close to being successful.
Yeah.
Right? Because you've done everything you possibly can. Tanking is worse. Tanking is when you're not physically or mentally prepared for whatever you're about to do. So there's a difference between tanking and choking. And whenever I have a conversation with athletes, a group of athletes, and say, which is worse, tanking or choking? They always say choking. And I was like, but that doesn't. And then I explained to them, I'm like, yeah, but if I'm on that line, I have a chance to win the game, and I miss it. Yes, I quote unquote choked. But the thing is I also had, it could have gone the other way.
Yeah.
So what I try to help them do is work on those moments where they won't choke.
Interesting. So kind of the build up to that could sometimes be a bigger issue than what's actually happening when you're there.
Correct. Like, you have to train the body. We train the body to prepare for the race. Why can't we train the mindset to prepare for those moments as well?
I like that a lot. And it makes sense too, because when you're up there, I mean, mechanics and muscle memory should kick in, but if you're thrown off before you get there, you're never going to have those reactions that you want.
And athletes today gets distracted easily. I mean, again, my children are older, and they have their phones, and their attention spans are different. So again, getting them to lock in to, like, well, you need to connect them why they're doing what they're doing. Yeah. So for example, like, why do you love this sport? Why do you love basketball? Why do you love golf? And then getting them to tell me about that brings them back to the original reason why they actually started doing that. Like, I can verbally say why I love rowing and still do it now. I love it because I love to compete. I love to push my body. I love the camaraderie of being with my teammates. I love to be able to measure my performance over time, and it makes me feel good about myself. And then I can take those things and apply them to my real life, because when I'm successful in sport, I think sport is easy compared to life, you know.
100%.
So that's what I'm trying to. I try to get the athlete and the parents to remember, like, they're doing sport as an escape for the real, to help them prepare for the real things that really
Yeah.
matter. And sometimes the parents and the kids think the sport matters more than life, and that's something that I have to kind of help them maneuver
Yeah, I
around.
think a lot of parents and athletes get lost in it nowadays. And
Right.
you touched on one thing I did want to bring up too. You're probably the perfect person to ask because of your kids' ages, but social media. So is that something that a lot of parents and athletes come to you nowadays to help not debunk, but just work through? Like, are there a lot of like distractions in terms of kids comparing themselves to other athletes because they see them all the time on social media, or just the idea that young kids now aren't good enough because they see pros and their heroes all the time right in front of their face on their screens? Like, is there a major difference between that, or is that overblown? It could be overblown between kids
I,
nowadays and what it was 30, 40 years ago.
I don't think it's overblown. I think it can be used as a strength. And I'll use my older daughter, for example. So she's not an athlete. She is actually into theater. And I actually had her take the profile to determine what type of theater person she was. And what was really interesting is that she and I are very similar when it comes to how we approach things. In fact, she's like my mirror image when it comes to theater as I am to rowing. So I'll use her as an example because she sings. That's what she does, and so she actually uses social media as a way to gather information about some of the Broadway performances or and performers, because it helps her feel confident in her ability to sing
Hmm.
well. But she also uses it as a way to see other different ways she should sing. And I try to process with her, because sometimes, like, you have to be careful not going down that rabbit
Yeah.
hole, because the more you see someone, like you said, that's a role model that might be better, you may start emulating the wrong behaviors, b also thinking you're not good enough and that you don't have the potential
Yep.
to. So I always ask, whenever I do the profile, I always sometimes try to talk about different sports, because I'll have a rower who loves the Eagles, because since we're in Pennsylvania, right? And so I'll say, well, who on the Eagles do you like? And I had an athlete who was like, well, I love Jalen Hurts. And I said, well, tell me why. I said, because I really like his approach to the game, how he carries himself. He's very professional when it comes to speaking to the media. He's always standing in the pocket. He doesn't just like run around crazy. And I'm like, that's awesome. I said, and so those are the characteristics that he takes from a completely different sport than what he does. When it comes to the same sport, that's where it depends on the sport. So I haven't really worked. I'll use football, for example. That's somewhere where I'd be interested to hear, like, who the role models there are.
Yeah.
Rowing is kind of boring when it comes to, you get on the rowing machine, you pull hard. Whereas, like, NFL and everything like that have more athletes who are kind of like out there on social
Yeah.
media, so
In the
you can kind of
spotlight.
we talk about the characteristics that they appreciate and whether that works for them, because we want to make sure that we're also, because if they're doing something that an athlete does, like, let's say it's a warm up or something like that, that might not work for them. They're just doing it because they see
Yeah.
that. They may have to be careful of that with that.
And what about with your daughter too? How do you blur that line? Because I agree. I mean, I think as an adult, right, you can see the good things in social media. You can learn a lot from it, and I have for business, sports, life, whatever. But sometimes too, I can feel myself going down the rabbit hole of like, all right, I'm too far into like this web now of like a
Yep.
basketball training tip, and I'm actually losing knowledge because I'm watching too much of it. But do you put a hard time cutoff? Do you put is it a feel thing for kids, or are kids not mature enough to know when the feel thing is coming when they're going on the wrong like path? How do you?
It's a great question. So in the profile, we talk about being in the zone. So when they take the profile, they answer a series of questions that actually makes them uncomfortable. They're not like they're more. It's not like a question about themselves. It's actually the way the profile is designed is they have to answer a bunch of questions. It's like word association,
Okay.
and what ends up happening is some of the questions are more difficult. So it causes kind of instant distress. So what's interesting about that is that how we respond to stress is something that we have to pay attention to, because stress can be good or bad. Stress, standing on that free throw line, I'm excited because we're about to win the championship. That's a good stress to have. But then there's the stress of, I don't want to go to practice because I hate my coach, right? So to your question about the social media, is this causing me to get out of the zone, right? And that's what the profile shows. It actually shows how your behaviors change from when you are in the zone and when you're stressed. First, we go over how to get in the zone. Then we talk about how to deal with the stresses that come at you, because you had pointed out earlier, what if they have a coach that yells, right? I always make a joke and say, I want you to imagine putting a translator like Duolingo up to your coach's mouth, and whatever they're saying and how they're saying, I want you to translate it into something that you actually understand. What is he saying? I had a coach like that. I'm a, I'm a master's athlete, so I've had tons of coaches. Well, we had a coach at my rowing club who is very, even at his age, our age, is very abrasive towards us. And no matter what he said, I would, even though like I would never coach like him, I was like, what is he saying? What information do I have to get out of it? I put the translator up to his mouth, and he loved me. Like he was like, "You're awesome." I'm like, "Cool." I'm like, "This is the guy who hates everyone." You know what I'm saying? So for some reason, he thought I was a great athlete, but meanwhile, as my teammates, these are again adults, he ended up getting let go. So because they could not separate
Yeah,
those two
it's hard.
things.
That's
So
hard for
back
young
to
athletes.
back to social media. If I had an athlete who was doing a lot of social media and it's like, oh, like I'm comparing myself to some of the people that I'm competing against and getting stressed, I'd say we'd have a simple conversation of like, well, why is this important? And then maybe that's where it's easier to tell them not to go on social media if it's causing
Yeah.
distress, because they'll see the result, right? I'll even go to even events, because one of my clients at Athlete Untapped was just at a wrestling tournament, and one of the things I asked her was, I said, how do you do in that type of environment at the tournament? And she said, I love it. And she's like, that motivates me. I'm like, good, then that's what I want you to do. But there are some athletes who would go to a tournament like that and be like, I'm just overstimulated. So those are the athletes you tell, go in your car, go away. However, sometimes they can't do that because the coach is like, you have to stay here. And then it's like, okay, do you want them to win,
Yeah.
or do you want them to lose? Like that's the thing, the conversation that comes back to with the parents and the coaches, like, what do you want to achieve, the athlete to achieve? Because you're putting them in a stressful environment, they're not going to perform well.
I guess, how do you, maybe before one of my last questions, how do you actually work that with coaches? Because parents, I understand, because they're coming to you as the coach. You can probably sit down with them and the athlete in one session and get through it all. I'm assuming you're not going to get someone's high school coach to come sit with you as the coach, Patrick, and the athlete. So like, you can say all you want to a young athlete, right? But if they do have a bad situation, or if the coach is old school and the parents and kids don't like that, but they like the school and it is what it is, whatever the situation is, how do you help them deal with that? Is it control what you can control, or should you go, I mean, I don't know if this is a recommendation, not go against the coach, but like push the barriers and do what's best for you? How do you help the athlete work through that?
It's a case by case. So I can honestly say, like, the goal for me is never to like ever say, oh, the coach is doing a bad
Yeah.
job, they're a bad coach. It's to say, once they learn what type of athlete they are, then I say, well, what kind of coach do you think your coach is? And so then that makes it easier to put that translator up and say, oh, the reason my coach is very firm and direct is because this is the type of coach he is. Now I can kind of tune out the how he says it. With the parents, it's the same, and if the parents are very involved in, like, I try to be upfront with the parents and say, listen, like, then if this environment is not quote unquote safe for your son or daughter, then you may need to decide to go to another team.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a conversation I have with the parents. I wouldn't necessarily have that with the athlete.
Yeah.
Sometimes the athletes are willing to put up with that, because based on, once they know themselves, they can almost deal with it. But sometimes the parents can't, and that's okay too. And I say, well, then you need to try a different team or a different environment. And sometimes they do. And then on the rare occasion, I will talk to a coach. That's always works well, because I never approach it. I never say to a coach, oh, you're doing the wrong thing. I'll say, this is how A and B, this is how so and so learns, and this is how this works best for them. And usually the coaches are like, great, thanks for letting me know. And then they start doing that. That's in the case of that father and his son. They actually went and won the state championship, which was like really cool, because the basketball, once he and his son came to the agreement that he was going to stop analyzing his son's game, saying, you need to be the best at A, B, and all these categories. the son was able to relax and start playing well. Their conversations in the car afterwards were not about what he didn't do. They were about what he did well. And that allowed him to continue to grow and play and better. And the best quote that came out of that was, the father had said to us originally in our first initial meetings, like, I just want him to, like, when I was a player, I just did whatever it took to win. When the son was interviewed, because they were a father-son, coaching thing, the son said, sometimes you got to do what it takes. And I was blown away, because it was like, he said what his father said, but that connection never would have happened if the son didn't realize what type of athlete he was, and his father didn't accept what type of athletes like. And so that's, again, what I try to do is and again, it's for all, this is across all sports. It's like my kids are into D&D right now, and I'm into D&D. So I'm in Dungeons and Dragons. Yep. So I'm saying, like, every different character in Dungeons and Dragons has different strengths. Like, we can't have it all. Yeah. It would be so nice to be able to be super strong and magical, and no, that wouldn't be very fun. So it's the same with athletes. It's like, some of our athletes are very aggressive. Some of our athletes are more, not laid back, but like they're very more observational, and they do the right thing at the right time. And so once you kind of talk to an athlete about how, like, basically this is your superpower, they get all excited, because they're like, this is what I do well. And then they just want to keep doing that. So, and for me as a mental performance coach, it's so fun to, like, get them to finally get that light bulb off and say, this is why I'm good at what I do. And this is why I love this sport.
I think a lot of people and a lot of athletes nowadays just aren't explained those things well.
Right.
That's just, I wasn't growing up in an era where mental performance coaching was even a thing. It probably was coming of age when I was younger, but I feel like now the best thing I've heard is you really should be training, maybe not equal percentages, but at least some part physical in terms of, like, your body, skills for the sport, and the mental. A lot of people just don't do the mental, and it doesn't have to be like 7 days a week, hours a day. It's just understanding these things that you can play better and feel better as you do it. Because a lot of athletes have the potential. It's just that mental block. And I always remember my dad, who played college football. It's a pyramid as you get older. I mean, when you're really young, talent outweighs everything. High school, probably about the same, but college, pro, beyond, like, everyone's got that talent. What's going to separate you? It's the 1%, which is usually the mental side. So
and honestly, it's really, again, getting the athletes to own what type of person they are, because then they feel more confident in who they are and why they are successful. Yep. And once they do that, again, with my clients that I've worked with in the past, I usually, once they figure out who they are, the conversations, it gets more and more spaced out. And the reason is because the athletes become more, they don't need me as much. And that's what we want as coaches, is we want to be able to give them the information and have them take it and run with it. And what's really nice is that, I'll get an athlete who every once in a while will reach out to me and be like, I did this really well, and this is because of what we talked about. And I'm like, that's so cool. I have an athlete who's graduated from college, and now he's getting back into the sport again. And he and I, we checked in for about an hour, and we just talked about, like, he was approaching a competition, and all the conversation had to do with mental. Like, the physical part he was doing great on, but the mental part. And so it's like, it's very rewarding to be able to see athletes, succeed. And that's really ultimately what we want as coaches. Like, we just want our athletes to be successful, and, as you said at the beginning, more successful than us. Why do this? So that's how I feel.
I was going to say, maybe my last question, you kind of hit on it there, but I'm always curious to ask, because I had the same thought, played for a while. I maybe gave it up for 6 months after I was done playing pro basketball. I kind of took a break, but then I was like, you know what? I really miss hoops. But I didn't want to be a high school coach or a college coach. I didn't want to make, full-time coaching my career. I wanted to still work in either tech or startups like I'm doing now, but I wanted to stay involved with basketball. So I started one-on-one coaching for fun and just kind of like spitballed it. But I'm always curious to ask other former athletes, because others, I think, know this is out there, whether they know about Athletes Untapped or not. They don't know how to get started. They think it's like a whole idea to put a business plan together and build a website. But, like, what gave you that initial kick to go from, all right, my playing days are over, I have a job now, and you said, like, software security, network security, but, like, I want to get into coaching. What gave you the kick to do that and then just keep going and wind up where you are today?
I actually needed help cope with my not making the Olympics. And so part of it started off with me just being like, I just needed to figure out why I wasn't successful. And then it became, I don't want anybody else to feel the way I felt after that. And what was awesome was that, first it was personal training and strength conditioning. And like, I realized I'm like, oh, I wasn't doing the right type of workouts. But then on the mental performance side, it was really just about being able to, like, number one, continue to enjoy the sport. As you said, after I was done competing, I went to coaching, didn't row, didn't train, and kind of felt like something was missing. Now I'm rowing again and I'm just loving it. And like, yeah, like I'm slow as compared, but I race, my people my age, which is great. But it's like at the same time, like I said to my daughter, because my younger daughter is gonna get into rowing.
Nice.
So we just actually did a competition 2 weeks ago, and she competed. And I said to her, I'm like, I'm nervous too. I'm still nervous, but because I've done the mental performance stuff, I was able to stay in the zone. But at the same time, like it doesn't matter whether I'm, you're 13 or 60, 70 years old. So there's always going to be a need for this. But again, so I find that like, there's no, like, even AI can't really help what we do, because it's that personal connection that I have. So like being able to tell somebody that, hey, this is why you're successful. This is because like I have the athletes tell me their stories, and once they tell me these stories, I get very excited, because I'm like, you were doing what we were talking about back then.
Yeah.
And so every time that connection happens, that light bulb goes off, and the athlete all of a sudden has success. It's just like, it's so exciting, because it's like I feel like I helped somebody, and then they carry it through. They become better people, like, because they have that confidence.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and it happens every time. It's like, a lot of my clients I had in the past have gotten a lot older. I had one of my athletes that I rode with last year, like at this time, he's now 35. I started training him when he was 17. So,
oh, wow.
And then he got into college and rode in college, and then he just had a kid. And like, it's just the funniest thing to, like, to still be able to connect with someone you coached way back then, who's still doing what he's still rowing. Like, it's crazy. Like he's trying to figure out how to balance rowing and, having a little baby, so, it's really cool. Yeah. It's very cool.
That's awesome, man. I think, you hit the nail on the head though. You have to, and I think a lot of athletes do, former athletes, they just don't know where to place that love for the game and love for energy. Because again, a lot of people have the idea that coaching is all or nothing. You got to be college coach, pro coach, like big time high school coach, but you don't have to. There's a lot of athletes who want to learn from former athletes, but they just don't know where to meet them. So yeah, kudos to you for jumping into it. Probably, it sounds like if you were training with that kid 18 years ago, before marketplaces and online coaching was even a thing, you just did it back in the early 2000s.
I just did it, and what's neat is the reason it worked is because I was doing what I'm doing now, but I didn't really know how to, organize it, and do it. But coaching was there, and so DISC has also helped me be a better coach, because I have to recognize, when I'm, talking too much or doing, whatnot. So I think, so I really enjoy it, and I'm glad I'm still doing that.
That's awesome. Well, Patrick, this was so much fun, man. I can't wait to share it. I think there's a lot of good tidbits and feedback for parents and athletes on the mental side of the game, and even just like understanding who they are, becoming better people. I think you hit a lot of the things that people want coaches to be nowadays, and we're lucky to have you on the AU team. So.
Yeah, and I'm enjoying it, and like I said, like, my most recent client did so phenomenal, and it's like I'm looking forward to doing this more through Athletes Untapped. So I've really enjoyed, like I said, we talked at the beginning, I really enjoyed working with you.
Appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.